Jonathan Powell, who you talked about, who you've now worked with, then Tony Blair's Chief of Staff, said at one point on this programme last year, I would say that you should try and open up a channel of communication with Hamas, with Al-Qaeda, with the Taliban, learning the lessons from the experience of the British government in Northern Ireland. I mean, is that what you think the United States, Barack Obama, the British, the Israelis should do? That these kind of organisations, Hamas, Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, are people who should be talked to?
I think so. If people are at war or involved in conflict, then first of all you need to know why. Because the old epithets of, you know, they're mindless killers or this or that really does not hold water when you get down to it. And I mean, we need to be frank about this. Governments are also involved in what's called terrorism. They're also involved in bombing people. You know, the invasion of Gaza recently was, I would argue, completely out of proportion to what had been happening there before. But without even taking sides, the lesson in it is that you must talk to your opponents to find out what is going on. I mean, even when I was involved in the IRA as a young volunteer, I read Frank Kitchen's books, Low Intensity Operations, because I wanted... Who was
a British Army general, who was an counterinsurgency expert.
Upon his thesis, most of the strategy was based, and you have to learn that and try and find out where they're coming from to get somewhere with it.
Well, the British Army did exactly the same. They read The War of the Flea, Che Guevara's diaries, everything. I mean, but then you have to know your enemy, and you have to engage in them some way that's not militarily, otherwise you can never get peace. Can you do that? Can you do that with these groups, with Al Qaeda, for example? You know, suicide bombing is a different.
Well, they're clearly at different levels, and you know, on a different scale. And I don't want to, as I said at the start, to take, you know, the conflict that we were involved in and put it on top of the Middle East or put it in the Philippines or anywhere else like that. But there are basic principles, and if you deal with it as principles, then I think it's important. I mean, in my opinion, there is nobody who should understand more this lesson than the Israelis themselves. If you look at the history of how Israel was made, and to be able to talk to people and to try and bring them over. And remember, in terms of Hamas, for instance, Hamas are elected people, you know, and this often came up in our talks in small or large degree, when people would say, I'm not going to talk to this person because he's an ex-prisoner, he was in the IRA and all of that, or vice versa. And we always took the attitude of, look, if you come to talk to me and you're who the British picked, then that's okay by me, because it's up to them to pick who represents them. You must also accept that if I'm the one who is sent to represent, whether it be a district in North Belfast or whether it be, you know, Sinn Fein, or whether it be a political a government or whatever, then accept that.
Because you can't choose the person who's going to be negotiating.
And that was part of the problem in our processes. There was a lot of that went on, although I think eventually they got over that. But you can't pick. Other people pick who represent them.
And you said that you don't impose the Northern Ireland model on other conflicts. But could I say one thing about Northern Ireland which was very different, at least it seemed to me? People were just tired of it. People of your generation who started off as a teenager, by the time you got to your 40s, and Northern Ireland had changed a lot. People were just fed up of the violence. Isn't that true? And you need that as a precondition.
No, I don't think you need it as a precondition. I think what you need is people on both sides who want to resolve it. And just to use the example, I mean, I would argue with you in my 40s. I mean, I'm still at this. I mean, I'm working as hard now as I did when I was 18.
Oh, I wasn't suggesting a degree of laziness.
I'm just trying to point out that, you know, I do think that conflict has to be, and this is something maybe people don't entirely understand, conflict has to be the choice of last resort. And quite often with governments, if I could say, it isn't the choice of last resort. And then you must find a way out of that, if I could say this, because in the 70s, the first piece of paper which was put together was a book called Pathway to Peace by Gerry Adams while he was interned in jail. And as early as that, Pathway to Peace was what was in his mind. He was thinking already, we have to find a way out of this. You know, again, on the other side, there was a General Glover in 1977, you may remember, who produced a document, I think it was document 37, which said, we cannot defeat the IRA, therefore there has to be a political solution. And in every situation from South Africa onward, it is the difference between trying to have a military solution, which very seldom, if ever, happens in modern history, and saying you can't contain this or it's not a security issue, and look at it politically and say, perhaps this can be resolved. But and there have to be people on both sides.
Well, but what's interesting about you saying that is right now, the successor to General Glover in the British Army, there are people within the British Army who are saying exactly the same things about the Taliban, because they know that a conventional military defeat of the Taliban doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, and listen to them, because they are on the front line.
But how do you get from there to some kind of process? I mean, you have to then engage properly with the Taliban. You have to talk to whoever these people are and see where you can make a deal.
Well, every situation is different. I would be very surprised if there is not contact with all those armed groups from different governments.
But always officially denied.
No, they will always be officially denied, and that's okay, but at some stage, you see, for it to work, it has to come out of secrecy. At some stage, it has to come out of secrecy, because the best guarantor of what you are doing is people knowing what you're doing.
One of the interesting parallels between your experience in Northern Ireland and Israel and the Palestinians now, which you brought up, is Senator George Mitchell, who is really, really important in Northern Ireland, now being asked by President Obama, as he was by Clinton, to go off and help. Mm-hmm. What do you think he can do?
Well, he has a record. His record is that he was a very good facilitator. I think he himself would say. I think it is a quote from him where he said that what is pulled asunder, I don't know if this is exactly the words, but what is formed by men can also be unpicked by men as well. So the war comes from men, and peace also comes from the men and women involved. And what he has he was a good facilitator in the sense that he did not come with the resolution, and that's important to understand as well. If people are expecting him to go to the Middle East with the resolution, I don't really think that's his job. What he did in the North was he listened to both sides, and he then tried to facilitate and make that area bigger so that you could get points of agreement, so that he came from one to the other and realized, well, maybe there's a middle line here. He was always a facilitator. And he once said, when we were, I suppose, giving him a bit of a hard time over what was just and what wasn't, he said, well, that's actually not my job. My job is to find a facilitation between all of yous. The resolution of it's really up to you, it's not up to me.
You said essentially that the Northern Ireland peace process has worked, and for most people in Northern Ireland, life is a heck of a lot better than it was a few years ago. But there are still problems, aren't there? There are dissident Republican groups. How serious a problem do you think they cause? There was a big bomb, £300 bomb, which was defused a couple of weeks ago.
Well, the difficulty with a small group, and they are small, they do not have any significant support. Their support is practically zilch. But do they have an ability? I mean, Oma is a perfect example, to carry out an action which will become an atrocity.
29 dead about 10 years ago, 11 years ago.
Exactly so, and it was just after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. I don't think they have an ability to drive people back to where it was before. I don't think they have any of that ability. Do they have an ability to hurt people? Yes, they do. Do they have any support? No, they don't, and I think that's important to know.
But there's still a wall in Belfast. I mean, it's still...
Well, there's several walls. I represent North Belfast, and there's 20 what euphemistically called peace walls.
And you wouldn't walk, if you were to walk on the other side of the wall, there are some people who still hate you.
Well, that's right, and I think you have to be realistic about all of that. Just to understand what a peace process is, or what an agreement is. An agreement forms a structure or a platform upon which you can build trust and peace and build on that. It was not the resolution. So are there still problems? We're in government with the DUP. No one thought it was possible, but that's where we are. Do we still have problems on an ongoing basis? I mean, I'm in an office, the First and Deputy First Minister's office. I'm a junior minister on it. Any decision which is made has to be made through consensus. So you can imagine if that was like the Conservative Labour Party in a Prime Ministerial office. So are there problems? Yes. But is it working? Absolutely yes as well.
One specific problem I want to touch on briefly. £12,000 compensation has been suggested to all the victims of violence. And as you know, this has caused great offence to some people who say the person who planted the bomb, for example, in a fish shop on the Shankill Road gets the same, his family get the same compensation as the people he blew up. This is wrong. Where do you stand on that?
I think it's a very unfortunate issue that it fell down on this issue of 12,000, because no one has said, in fairness to the Eames Bradley report, said that it was in compensation or anything like that. What they said it was an acknowledgement of the suffering across the board. Now, I do think, I have to say personally, that it was a mistake, and I mean, it's easy in hindsight to say that, but clearly it was a mistake because it has caused so much controversy. The real issue is that there has to be truth. What people want to know is the truth, and that's on all sides. If there is one thing, because there's many different views of what would bring a peace to people's minds who have lost loved ones, but the one thing which goes through it all is the simple issue of truth. They want to know what happened. There's some people want prosecutions, some people may want compensation, other people may want people going to court, but the one thing which goes through it all is truth. Now, the British government have a great responsibility in producing truth, because they have the archives, they have the information. What they should do is open it up. People are complaining about the millions that are paid over the Savile inquiry. It wouldn't be necessary to pay that millions if files were opened up.
Can I just end with a couple of minutes left on you? I mean, do you ever wake up with some sort of sense of unreality about this, that your life has gone quite amazingly in the past 20 years?
If you had have asked me even 10 years ago would I be a minister in government, then it would not have been in my head. But what would have been in my head would that there was a resolution. See, one of the issues, one of the most used, and you'll know this yourself, used words to describe what was happening in the north of Ireland was that it was an intractable problem. There is no such thing as an intractable problem. And I think as Republicans we clearly knew that. And in fairness to Tony Blair, the difference he made when he came in was that he knew it also. He had the imagination, along with Bertie Ahern and Bill Clinton, Gerry Adams, John Hume. They had the imagination to say that, you know, we can possibly sort this, let's try it. And that's the first point that you need to get.
But it is very tough to do that for people who just want to get through the next week, when you're saying a problem that's gone on for several hundred years can be solved. That's a very difficult sell, isn't it?
No,
even to yourself.
No, it is a very difficult sell, and the biggest negotiation that you will have, besides your own personal internal negotiation, is with your base. It is not actually necessarily with your opponents. It is that you have to go back to your base and say, look, we think there's changes here. We think there is a political alternative. You know, and in Irish history in particular, because of the history of armed struggle, that was very difficult. I think the leadership like Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, in terms of this, that they brought Republicans through all of this without a split. Because there was a joke that, you know, used to be when Republicans, the first item on the agenda was a split. But we've come through all of this with I think, a great unity of purpose, and gained in strength and gained in political strength, and moving the whole press forward. And we have convinced the vast majority of people that this is the way forward. And when I say vast, I mean the vast, vast majority of people.
Gerry Kelly, thank you very much.
Thank you.